Hi folks, ThriceRisen here. I promised in an earlier video that I was going to do a breakdown of how I like to build Magic decks, particularly for Commander. This gets skewed a little bit once I go into the 60 card format, but a lot of the same principles apply. And a good example of how I build this deck is I have my Meren of Clan Toth deck, which I have broken down in another video before. I've since made a lot of changes to it, and I have actually 3 new cards that I want to add to the deck today, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity for me to break down the deck and show how I do deck construction and what my philosophy and thought process is. How much removal do I do? How do you do things like that? So I'm going to take these cards that I'm going to add to the deck. I'm going to set them aside for now, along with the experience marker and the commander herself. She'll come back in later. Now, I have the deck here. I'm just going to break it down. I'm going to get all the land out of the deck first. I usually run about 38 land. I usually don't go below that number of land. And in this particular deck, I think I'm still running exactly 38 land. I'm also running a lot of things that go get land. Various things like Ulvenwald Hydra and so on. But I'm not going to stop and dwell on these cards too much, because we're going to go over them in some detail once I break the deck apart. But a lot of people disagree. Well, not a lot of people. I've had people disagree with me on the amount of lands to run. I think that's an eternal debate for Commander decks. Some decks don't need it. My Tassiger deck, which I previewed in a prior video, it runs about 37 land and it does just fine. This deck, I'm pretty sure, still runs 38. We'll get to the final count in just a second, actually, once I get there. And if you're paying attention to the cards as I'm going past them, you'll notice there's a lot of cards I've added since the last video. So that's 5, 10, 5, 10, 5, 10, 4. Yep, so I'm running 38 land. The land, you can basically break it down into things that are basic lands and things that aren't. So you have swamps, forests. The land is kind of a weird consideration because, oddly enough, when I'm talking about deck percentage and other things, I actually usually completely ignore the land and everything that is contained in the land. So I'm gonna look at it now briefly just to show you the land that I'm running. Let's get all these forests out here. Let's get that there. Okay, so this is a Crypt of Agadeem. It's not long for this world because I'm probably going to replace it with some other things. So what we have here is various forms of mana acceleration. Right here we have Temple of the False God, Crypt of Agadeem, Cabal Coffers, and Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. Then we have some utility land, such as Bajuka Bog, Westvale Abbey. I consider it a utility. It's a land that turns into a creature. Urborg is technically a colored land. Then I have this Overgrown Tomb. Then we have some land that goes and finds other land. Blighted Woodland, Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds. So this is just a swamp forest that I can fetch out with various effects in the deck. And these are the only utility land I'm running in the deck. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 swamps. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14 forests. So I have a couple lands that I'm going to add to this deck. Namely, I want to add a Lotus Vale and a Volrath's Stronghold. Lotus Vale, when it comes into play, sacrifice 2 tapped lands, or bury, or that is sacrifice Lotus Vale, and you can tap it to add 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So it's pretty cool. Volrath's Stronghold, you can tap it to add 1 colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 1 and a black and tap. Put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. So in a deck that, like Meren, where you're reanimating things all the time, it's pretty good. So I was originally going to cut Crypt of Agadeem And I have a surplus of forests, and I'm actually wondering if I just want to cut down on some forests. The answer is maybe. I have a lot of effects that go find basic land. I think the Crypt is still going to come out in favor of this Lotus Veil. So it's a mana increasing effect for a mana increasing effect. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio there. The Volrath Stronghold, I will probably just take out a forest. I'm going to double check to make sure I don't have any forests of a different art. So I'm just going to pick a forest, random, and I'm going to take that out and put this Volrath Stronghold in as another utility land. Because in a 2-color deck like this, I'm not too worried about missing a color. And I run fewer swamps strictly because I have a lot of ways of finding this Urborg and putting it into play. So that's the mana base of this deck. So now that we've made those changes, I'm going to just scoop these up and set them aside. And as I said before, the land, I completely ignore any utility or special land when I get to the part of calculation I'm going to show you now. This is how I build decks. I break my decks down into 6, technically 7 categories, the 7th being the land, which I ignore. I basically treat the land as, you might say, icing. It's extra effects that you add to your deck. I don't consider them part of deck effects for the purposes of this calculation. And what this calculation is I break the deck into 6 categories. And I put a playmat out and I break it down thusly. I have in this corner, I have ramp. Below that I have tutor effects. Below that I have recursion effects. Then I have card advantage, anything that lets you scry, draw cards, or fiddle with your deck in any way that's not a tutor. And then I have answers. These could be sweepers, like board wipes, or they could be targeted removal, or deterrents, like I would consider Swiftfoot Boots an answer to removal, so it would go in this column. And then down here I have my threats. These are the things that let me win the game, or they're the things that are going to be highly targetable by opponents. Things like a Vorinclex, for example, if you resolve it, it's not necessarily going to win you the game, but people are going to hate you for it, and they're going to make you a target. So what I do is I break down the deck and I just put the cards in the places where they go. So as you can see, I'm finding ramp, I'm finding tutors, I'm finding answers, skull clamp, and we just break it all down like this. Gonti I consider card advantage. Life from Loam, that's recursion. There's going to be a lot of recursion in here. Disciple of Bolas. Yavimaya Elder, here's a good example of a card that has 2 types. And whenever you have a card that you're not sure what it does, you just have to think, what is the thing I'm most likely going to use it for most of the time? So yes, Yavimaya Elder, you can draw a card off of it, but he's more than likely is going to be getting you lands, so he is a ramp card. Brutalizer Exarch, it can be an answer, it can be removal, but I usually use it for its tutor effect, so it goes over here. And then you just keep going. Evolution Leap, card advantage, Green Warden, got Tooth and Nail, Expedition Map. Now, ramp that finds you a land is not a tutor for the purposes of this calculation. It is still mana ramp. As you see, I have a fair amount of mana ramp in this deck. And so you just keep going. Phyrexian Plague Lord, it's an answer because it shoots things. Baby Lily goes down there. Grey Merchant, Flesh Bag. Uvenwald Hydra, it's a monstrous creature. It's a huge threat. It's ramp because it gets me land. And just keep going through. Get some card advantage. Get some more tutor. Answer. This I consider a threat because it makes tokens. And they have Death Touch. And it doesn't really fall into any of the other categories. So I put it over here. Gerard's Orders is a tutor. Solemn. Living Death is technically a reanimation. Mutilate is a kill. Phyrexian Obliterator, definitely a threat. Viscera Seer's card advantage. Sadistic Sacrament, it could be a threat or it could be an answer. I've been on the fence. It's fallen into either pile at various times depending on my mood. Today, I'd say it's an answer to combo decks, so I'm going to put it there. Then you have Acidic Slime, another answer. Sifter of Skulls, this is an interesting one because it makes mana, but it also does other things. I leaned for it to be mana, so I'm going to put it there. Dread Return, Woodland Bellower is a tutor effect. Terastodon is an answer. Entomb is a tutor effect. Spore Frog is an answer to combat. Dictate, it's kind of a threat. It's technically an answer to the fact that they have creatures. Natural Order is a tutor. Crozen Grip, Reclamation Stage, and Wormcoil Engine. And then your commander tends to fit into various categories. Mine fits into Recursion. So you see how this deck breaks down. I have, let's see, these are my ramp cards. I have Uvenwald Hydra, Expedition Map, Sakura Tribe Elder, Yavimaya Elder, Skyshroud Claim, Soul Ring, Sifter of Skulls, Solemn Simulacrum, Sylvan Scrying, Diligent Farmhand, and Nissa Vastwood Seer. So that's 3. I have 11 sources of ramp. 10 if you count the Sifter as something else. I never go below 8 sources of ramp in a commander deck. I never do it just because you want to accelerate your deck. This deck likes making piles of mana and doing stuff with it, so I have these as ways to get more mana more quickly. Also, many of these are creatures that can turn into sack effects and other things. And for example, Nissa, she is a ramp technically, but then when you flip her, she turns into card draw. So she also kind of floats between these two categories, depending upon which mode she's in. Card advantage, I have Viscera Seer, I have Harmonize, I have Evolutionary Leap, I have Disciple of Bolas, Gonti, Lord of Luxury, and Skullclamp. The card advantage section of this deck is a little lacking. The deck prefers to try to tutor out specific cards to be more consistent rather than draw a bunch of cards. Granted, Disciple can draw me half my deck by itself. If I sack something like an Emrakul and draw 13 cards, and then reanimate the two of them, do it again, draw 13 more cards, the deck can go through itself very fast if I'm not careful. So she's just good for that. Tutor effects, I have Natural Order, I have Entomb, Woodland Bellower, Gerard's Orders, Dark Petition, Tooth and Nail, Brutalizer Exarch, and Runescarred Demon. We're going to be adding another tutor effect to the deck a little later, which is Buried Alive, but we'll get to that. Answers. I like having answers in decks. Acidic Slime, Rexage, Crozen Grip, Caustic Caterpillar, Terastodon, Putrefy, and Beast Within. These are all targeted removal that can hit a wide variety of permanents. Sadistic Sacrament goes after their deck. Then I have Slum Reaper, Merciless Executioner, and Fleshbag Marauder to go after their creatures by forcing everyone to sack stuff. Doubly so if I have a Dictate of Erebos out. And then Phyrexian Plague Lord if I have a Dictate. Every time I sack something to shrink a thing, I can maybe get them to kill something else. Mutilate's just a general board wipe, especially because I'm running Urborg in the deck. So this can just kill everything in its massive shrink. This card is an MVP. It is very much an MVP. You'll see in a little postscript I'll add at the end of this video. On paper, the synergy with Meren of Clan Nel Toth is obvious. Okay, so you can sacrifice it and recur it. In practice, this is stupidly powerful. Especially if you're just having a friendly one-on-one with a game, it quickly will become not friendly because you have one turn and this will come back and they can never attack you, ever. Unless they can deal with the Spore Frog somehow. And even then, the way to deal with it is to sudden spoiling and then shoot it maybe, or exile it from the graveyard. It's very limited in how they can deal with this card. So it's a solid card. Every Meren deck should have one. Now we get into my recursion, of which Meren of Clan Nel Toth is one. We have Dread Return, Living Death, Skullwinder, Liliana, Heretical Healer, Green Warden of Marasa, Animate Dead, Veldon's Cane, Phyrexian Delver, Life from the Loam, Eternal Witness, and Beacon of Unrest. I run Life in the deck just because I have a lot of cool utility lands, and I don't have a lot of other ways to get them back, other than I do have some effects like the Skullwinder. I prefer generic graveyard recursion rather than like creature. I do have some, obviously, because of Dread Return and Animate Dead, but I like Eternal Witness effects because they can get non-creature cards back for me to use again. And of course, Liliana Heretical Healer is really good in the deck, and I've explained in other videos why I prefer Feldon's Cane. I'll retouch on that. I prefer this because of the fact that you tap it and remove it from the game as part of the cost. So if you have an elixir and you activate it, the elixir does not shuffle into your deck until the ability resolves. So you're getting the shuffle effect, but if they Crow's and Grip your elixir or they putrefy it or anything, your graveyard will shuffle, but you lose the elixir and you can't do it again, and you haven't wasted 2 mana. That's the other reason I prefer this is free. You don't have to pay anything, you just tap it. And it exiles as part of the cost, so you're losing the artifact either way if they have removal, and this costs nothing. So I prefer this. Now let's go to threats. We have one of my favorite all-time cards in Magic, the Wormcoil Engine. So good. We have Phyrexian Obliterator. This guy, he's a threat, but I usually use him as a deterrent. Because if they have a big giant creature, say they have like a 14/14 that Xenagos God of Revels has roided up, and there's a Thunderfoot Baloth and stuff. This actually happened in a game I played the other day, so I'm not just hypothesizing. And I played this. I said, I'm going to get a little cheeky with you. And I tutored this up and I played it, and I said, oh, you were really proud about that 14/14 Trampler a second ago, but you don't want to sack 14 permanents, do you? Or 5 permanents at the very least. So it stalled him out and I was able to win. Ogre Slumlord, whenever any of my stuff dies, which is going to be all the time, I get a 1/1 Death Touch Rat, so it's pretty good. Thunderfoot Baloth, as I mentioned before, amazing, especially if I'm making a lot of little tokens. Grey Merchant, I have enough Black Devotion in this deck where he causes a huge amount of bleed, especially with my commander reanimating him every turn if I can sacrifice him somehow. Grave Titan, it's a Grave Titan. They're amazing. They're very good. Filth is one of the big win conditions of the deck. I put him into the graveyard with Gerard's Orders or Buried Alive or something like that, and then all my stuff goes through. I usually like to Gerard's Orders for a Filth and a Thunderfoot Baloth, because then it makes all my stuff bigger and unblockable with Urborg in play. Avenger, really great. It makes a lot of tokens, so I can do a lot of sack effects and things like that. Exsanguinate is a backup win condition if for some reason I can't get through with combat damage. I have enough things that make mana in this deck where I can do a really large Exsanguinate. And Emrakul is just a big giant beater that occasionally can Mindslave a return. And being a graveyard deck, I usually make her cost as low as 5 mana sometimes. Well, not I usually make her cost 5 less. Sorry, I misspoke there. Okay, so where do we put this Buried Alive? There's a lot of places we could maybe cut something, and as I said, you can, when you break the deck out this way, you can see where your strengths and weaknesses are in terms of card types. Like you can see my card draw is very weak comparatively. I don't have as many card draw type effects, so I probably won't cut one of these. Unless it's just not working out of the deck, which Gonti isn't working out as well, but I'm going to cut him for something else as opposed to an effect. Once I get a better card draw effect, I'll probably replace Gonti. But then again, there's the argument that could be made. This tutors for cards, so it's a nice even substitution, but he's also a creature, so there's some debate there. Honestly, I think Life from the Loam might be the thing to cut. I run enough graveyard recursion. There's not a huge amount of land destruction in my local meta, so this might be a card I put into the sideboard in exchange for Buried Alive, which Buried Alive will let me throw other things into the graveyard. So that's probably the choice I'll make for now. I might change that decision, but as you can see, I have a lot of recursion, so I don't feel that bad taking from it in this deck, even though it's so recursion-centric, but my commander is recursion built in, And so never feel too terrible about taking a card out if your commander has that effect on them. Like if you're running a blink commander, like for instance, Brago, then you might sacrifice a blink effect just because you have it on demand with your commander. So that's how I break down decks. I try to keep like no fewer than like 6 cards or so in these formats. Now recursion's the exception because some decks don't really care. You could run less than 6 or none. I would really hesitate to run less than 3 or 4 recursion effects in a deck. That's because I like recursion and graveyard is value. I like graveyard decks. I am a Golgari mage. I have accepted this truth as part of my life. Plans for the deck in the future, I have a couple cards I want to get. I really want to get a Nim Deathmantle for this deck because A, it's recursion, so it's good. B, if you pair it up with something like any of these gentlemen here, any effect that makes 2 or more tokens when it enters, plus a Nim Deathmantle, plus for Ashnod's Altar, which lets you sacrifice a creature to get 2 colorless mana, lets you make infinite tokens and or infinite colorless mana. So you play the Nim Deathmantle, you play one of these, you get the 2 zombies, or you sack this and get the 2 tokens, or you play this and get a ton of plants. You sacrifice in this and one other thing to Ashnod's Altar. You use the 4 mana that you generate to get this back, attach the Ashnod's Altar. It makes 2 more tokens. You have an extra token that you could sack for more mana, or you could leave it and get more tokens, but technically you could stack it you could layer it however you want, so that you get infinite tokens and infinite colorless mana. So the Exsanguinate will go off for a huge amount if you have it in your hand, or you could just make infinite tokens if you don't have anything to use the mana on. That's the one thing in this deck, is it doesn't have a huge amount of pumpable effects that I can put colorless mana into. It's actually why I added Nykthos to get more green for Evolutionary Leap, because that's the only repeatable pumpable effect in the whole deck. It's something I've been trying to figure out a alternative for, or if I want to. It's been a point of internal debate for me. But the Nim Deathmantle will probably take the place of one of these other reanimate effects, just to make it more simple. There's a couple other cool cards to add as well. Mere Battlesphere would pair well with that synergy that I just discussed. I want to get some better lands. Gaia's Cradle would be nice, but that's expensive. But just little things. This deck, I'm very happy with where it's at. And I just keep making little improvements over time. This one's been, the Buried Alive's been a card I've wanted for the deck for a while. I just couldn't track one down. I finally found one in a rare box at one of the local game stores near where I live. And it was just in that box, and I was like, gimme. And I got it for the deck. And I got a second Grave Titan to go in one of the other decks that I'm working on, which I haven't discussed yet. So this is the current version of my Meren of Clan Toth deck. In the future, I'll probably get the card I mentioned, and I might try to improve my card draw, because I see this is a little lacking. I haven't had problems with it, but it couldn't hurt to increase my card draw just a little bit. Maybe get rid of the Sadistic Sacrament, because I usually don't cast it that often. Shift this up into some form of a card draw. Alright, I'm ThriceRisen. Thanks for watching. This is John's board state at the end of the game. Those are +1/+1 counters.
Those are +11/+11 counters.
This is my life total. How did I win? This guy. MVP!